I thank you for hosting this program. And first, I want to give my condolences to Khadija, Osama, the family, yourself, and your mother, and everybody who's having to deal with this issue because I've been dealing with families who have been going through this issue for the last nearly 20 years, since 2001, after 9/11. The United States, and I don't know Canadian law, and I'm not up to speed on cases in Canada, so I can't speak to that. But here in the US, the problem of Abdurrahman has been, for the lack of a better term, an epidemic, a pandemic in America. And we have a legal precedent called the Material Support Statute that allows law enforcement to be preemptive in the US, meaning you prior to 9/11, you had to commit a crime, you actually had to break the law, and then they catch you, punish you, and put you in jail. After 9/11, the new theory of law enforcement is preemptive law enforcement in response to terrorism, so that as to not suffer the consequences of terrorism, law enforcement has to prevent terrorism. And to do that, they have to act before it happens. So they can't wait for terror, they have to be preemptive. So, in order to be preemptive, they are catching people, prosecuting people before a crime happens. Technically, prior to 9/11, that would never happen. You don't have thought crimes. And yet it is a real, it is a valid, and it is a confirmed legal theory that exists today. So what Abdurrahman has been subjected to is a thought crime. And all that was needed to arrest him was one act that is considered in furtherance of a conspiracy. And those shipping the supplies or whatever was enough for the government to say, hey, you've now committed terrorism. And the letter of the law, that's what happened in their minds. Now, we're talking about entrapment. You read the definition. That's still the definition in the US. But there has not been one court in the US that has allowed or upheld the defense of entrapment in cases not exactly like Abdurrahman, but very similar. Sister Khadija brought up a book written by an award-winning author, an investigative journalist named Trevor Aronson. Trevor Aronson researched all the cases across the US that involved an informant. And he studied the cases after the fact, and he found that all the cases that had an informant ended up, it was the informant who came up with the idea for terrorism. It was the informant who instigated the plot, who carried on and carried on and carried on until at some point he was capable of enticing the whoever his audience was into saying verbally and doing things to break the letter of the law so that they could be arrested for material support of terrorism. And had it not been for the FBI, the informant, their resources, their plot, and all of their effort to do so, none of these crimes would have been committed by the defendant. And the government, even though that has been presented in court and has been argued by some of the best attorneys in America, no court and no jury has yet accepted that defense, because the government's response to that is, all we did was bring out of the defendant, or the alleged defendant, what existed in them prior to it. So they're saying that what existed inside of each one of these people was the urge to commit terrorism. And all the instigation, all the money, all the conniving, all the lying, all of the entrapment was only bringing out what already existed. So that theory from the government has succeeded in every instance in these types of cases to date in the US. So it's not a valid, or it's not been a successful legal defense to claim entrapment. Even though the practice is abhorrent, it needs to be exposed. It needs to be discussed, because you give me enough money, enough time, and bad intention, and I can take anybody's kid, any vulnerable person, any people in society, and lead them down a path to break a law. And if I can't find everybody, I can find somebody. And this is a very horrible practice. It is an unethical practice, in my opinion, but it is something that nonetheless is very prevalent. In Abdurrahman's case, he has two paths to pursue at the moment, and both cannot be pursued at the same time. The family, and I understand why, wants him in Canada tomorrow. They want him to receive his health care, his medicine, for every reason that Khadija mentioned. It is imperative that he be, if he's going to serve time and be in custody, Canada's where it should be. That cannot happen under US law until he ceases to have any legal proceedings in US court. So if he's going to fight his conviction in any way, then he will not be, they won't consider the moving of his case or his presence out of the US. So, and when he does, if he does move to Canada, there is no commuting of sentence or arguing or any legal precedent to help him other than giving him his medicine once he's in Canada. So those are two different things. And I believe the family's wanting to have all their legal options open to them at the moment. And we are an organization that are looking at that, and we'll discuss that with them moving forward. But the advocacy needs to be clear in Canada at the moment, exposing what I think you call it the Royal Canadian Police, the tactic, the practice of entrapment needs to be exposed. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be heard. It needs to be felt. Applying it to an argument to bring him home would be counterproductive at the moment. So exposing is good, unless you just want him home, because the two are different things. So that needs to be clear.